here for a while. I don't recall how long. This was
2011.
Really? No, 2011. And so, and Jason and I know each other from the past. In fact, he and I were both at University of Redlands before we built team around here. So we were skiing and doing other stuff. So we've had some.
When he was coming to Prescott, I can quit a master's that I started in education to come here.
So, anyway, so we have been in cahoots ever since. And Jason's been working with wilderness, specifically in the Sierra Nevadas, specifically on the eastern flank, right? Or
all over.
Yeah.
The 2 national parks in the Sierra.
So he does a lot of outdoor education stuff. He's back at Redlands. He was kind of like the leader of the outdoor center program, yeah. And they took students climbing and doing all sorts of outdoor stuff. So that's kind of his background. And so he spent a great deal of time out in the wilderness and started to have second thoughts about this notion of wilderness, this governmental notion of wilderness or philosophical notion of wilderness as being a place where humans are not. And he started to acknowledge that is there any validity to that, or what validity is there, and led to this sacrilegious study in which he acknowledges the relevance of humans.
So are you here or there now? You're here.
I'm here at Prescott, yeah. That was my past. Yeah. So I'll be finishing after this thesis presentation in December, hopefully. So it's like my last so hi, I'm Jason Blauch again. This is my thesis presentation, Trammeled Wilderness, the Myth of Pristine Nature in Sierra Nevada. I wanted a title that would catch everybody, but it also evokes some of the language of the Wilderness Act and sort of evokes the myth that wilderness must be pristine of people and the evidence of people. Trammeled Wilderness borrows from the Wilderness Act, the language of the Act, that states that wilderness is defined as being untrammeled by man, so unconstrained or confined by man, where man is a visitor and does not remain. And I argue that the national parks especially are trammeled wilderness. That's not such a bad thing. So I chose, after a lot of time narrowing down a focus, my area of focus in my research, I chose the Sierra Nevada, particularly for its importance, I believe, in the environmental history of the United States. If you look at the prehistory of the Sierra Nevada, it had been people who were humanized for 10,000 plus years. It encompasses this rugged beauty that, as lovers of wilderness and even our Eurocentric minds like to think of as sublime, majestic wilderness. It also has a lot of natural resources like grazing land and timber and mineral resources, famously the gold rush of 1849 happened in the foothills, western foothills of the Sierra Nevada. And it also represents to a lot of us currently what is wilderness. And so if we think about nature in the wild and majestic landscapes, our modern American minds go to El Capitan and the giant sequoia trees in the western foothills of the Sierra. And so start to represent what wilderness is in the American mind. It also is the birthplace of American environmentalism and houses some of the oldest national parks in the United States. Yosemite National Park that was established in 1890, as well as Sequoia National Park in 1890 as well. So I'm actually going to skip to my primary research questions. So again, borrowing from the Wilderness Act, my thesis centers around how we define wilderness in contemporary society in America today, and what are we going to do with that? So initially, my first question is, in what ways has the language of the 1964 Wilderness Act been interpreted to argue for or against the presence of human construction in designated wilderness areas? So looking at a historical perspective, and we'll talk about the Wilderness Act in just a second, in that more in detail, how have our kind of Eurocentric, as I call them, inherited beliefs on what is wilderness informed the language of the Wilderness Act, which now informs and influences policy making, and has designated wilderness areas within national forests and national parks. And then looking to present day and to the future, what does this mean for the existence of popular trail systems, pack stock, and high camps in Yosemite National Park? SECI is just shorthand for Sequoia Kings Canyon. Both of those national parks merged under the same, they're administered simultaneously as of 1943. So, looking back to kind of the roots of wilderness, wilderness in a lot of the European influenced minds exists in opposition to culture. And so, through a lot of environmental philosophers, the two cannot exist simultaneously. And this is a problem. This is informed, like I said, the language of the Wilderness Act, which now policy is created on. And just as a culture, it's easy to then fall into that same kind of dualistic mindset that what is wilderness, people cannot be there. And I believe that this is a problem because that doesn't help the fact that nature is not necessarily infused as well into our society as it could be. And sure, one can argue that there's a lot of recreation happening that's very in vogue now to be blazing trails through the wild. However, one of my arguments is that that too is a consumptive use of the natural world. And so let's put it into a little bit of historical perspective. I mentioned in prehistory, people have been inhabiting this landscape for 10,000 plus years. And in that time, through what anthropologists call native burning of meadowlands to bring about the growth of more desired plant and animal species, the construction of irrigation canals, construction of dwellings, granaries, all of this kind of conspired to create this humanized landscape. Humans became a keystone species. And so when white settlers, European settlers, first moved into Sierra Nevada, they kind of had a conflicting view of this landscape that they were experiencing. Now, on the one hand, exemplified by this painting in the background, that shows the juxtaposed in these two images. But in that background, through the European eye, they were witnessing Eden. A lot of paintings, like Albert Bernstein's painting back here, conveniently crops out native inhabitation or dwellings, and that kind of fulfilled the idea that this wilderness was this Eden, this people's place where people would go and experience the sublime, they experience divinity, and that people do not remain in these places. Because what they're also bringing into this landscape is this idea of being back in the wilderness, gaining this wildness that they experienced. And they also simultaneously described these areas that they were traveling through as being manicured and park-like roads of trees by virtue of 10,000 years of human alteration and management. And so I included here some native dwellings in Yosemite Valley in the late 19th century. So in the late 19th century, there was a transformation in sort of the mindset and relationship of humans and nature. And this was brought about, you could argue, through industrialization, the rise of the industrial age, and people started feeling like they were losing touch with the natural world. And so enter John Muir and other transcendentalists that wanted to inspire the public, go out, have contact, have access with the natural world. And what John Muir did was not only that, inspiring people through his voluminous writings and just how eager he was to be out in nature and study everything from the majestic mountains to the tiny little ants and their little habits. But he also he created one of the first environmental movements, helped create, and one of the first environmentalist groups, the CRC201. And around that time, too, is when preservation started becoming ever more popular to preserve these areas because arguably they were in danger of being overused or through consumptive practices like the gold rush 50 years prior to or 48 years prior to the founding of Yosemite National Park, people realized these places were in danger. And John Muir himself really preached access. And in the words of my advisor, who wrote a book called Contact, that contact with the natural world is of utmost importance. If we don't have contact, then we're just idly sitting by watching movies go by through our windshield or through pictures. That access came with a price. Roderick Nash wrote a popular book called Wilderness in the American Mind in the 70s, which opened people's eyes to this idea that wilderness and culture really do exist in opposition. He wrote that this wilderness now is being loved to death. And what do we do about that? How do we create policies to preserve and protect these areas, not for consumptive use, so not for mineral extraction, but to exist in and of themselves, wilderness for the sake of wilderness. And so, these are two maps of the Sierra Nevada, and that just illustrate a patchwork of land managers and land use. And you can see that the range has been then carved up in various areas under different management, different land managers. And this map here on the right, you can see Sequoia Caves in Yosemite, and the rest are national forests, other wilderness areas. And so that was the first step, protecting these areas, protecting this range against this overuse, whether it's consumptive, whether it's an aesthetic idea of wilderness appreciation. And then it was realized soon afterwards that to provide access would necessitate providing paved roads, easy accessing trails, signage, accommodations within areas that will become wilderness in future years by virtue of the Wilderness Act. So the Wilderness Act had done a really great job as defining, for the first time that I can think of, I don't know if anyone else has an example, of a public law, a policy being drawn around this framework, trying to define something as, I don't know, metaphysical as an idea of wilderness. For example, as you know, one person's RV park is another person's wild place. It's exactly the reason why you see people in the Yosemite Valley taking pictures of squirrels, because they're marketed. That's marketed as wilderness. It's marketed as raw, wild nature. And I would argue that the foothills around most of our hometowns have wild creatures. But by virtue of that marketing, those places get a lot of traffic and a lot of attention. And in 1964, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Wilderness Act to define wilderness, to catalog areas that fall under this wilderness quality, and then to further protect those areas and to manage them further, even more so than just through designation as a national park or national forest. And so the definition of wilderness here in the Wilderness Act is really interesting. I think the authors of the Wilderness Act really did good job at defining, at least in 1964, what wilderness is in most Americans' minds. It also does a really good job at playing to this sort of gray area and leaving something up to interpretation. It makes a lot of comments. I underlined a few about permanent improvements of human habitation. Let's see. The imprint of man's work is substantially unnoticed, but not entirely unnoticed. There's a lot of provisions in there for some interpretation. That can lead to some issues, though. The Wilderness Act, the language of the Act, has been used to argue for or and against preservation, and for or against people in the wilderness, infrastructure in areas that could potentially be cataloged as wilderness. And so, for example, there have been areas that have been surveyed as potentially being mined or logged. And there's companies that go and say, well, here there's a road in this area that we want to preserve as designated wilderness. I'm sorry if there's a road that goes against what the Wilderness Act mandates. There's, on the other end of the spectrum, there are advocates of a purist, of a purity philosophy of wilderness that would say anything man-made, anything for the man is absolutely does not belong in these areas. And so we have an issue because the Wilderness Act was signed in 1964, but structures like I'll get into the high Sierra camps that exist in designated wilderness that have existed there prior to that designation. Advocates of pure wilderness are saying dismantle those, keep trails to a minimum. And if you look at the National Park Service mandate, this is specific to cultural resource management, so that can include prehistoric sites. It also includes historic sites since colonization. You can see there's a lot going on here. There are a lot of objectives, a lot of goals that have been overlaid onto this landscape. And to me, that's appropriate. That's a National Park Service mandate. National Park Service, established in the late 19th century, wanted to create access. They wanted to create education. And without those things, where would the preservation movement be? Oh, strike that. And so, talking about historical and prehistoric structures, this is also a part of our Wilderness Act, our definition of wilderness, a la Wilderness Act. And they also contain ecological, geologic, and other features of scientific, educational, scenic, or historical value. So this is where I think the Wilderness Act really does a service to for us, for our culture, and nature being infused into our culture, is that it allows these provisions for education, for our human history that has been imprinted on the landscape. I think that that's valuable. So I talked a little bit, I made reference to the high Sierra camps. So in 1916, when the first high Sierra camps was one of the first high Sierra camps was established in Yosemite National Park in the high country, if y'all are familiar, up in the Tully Meadows area. Then the last one was built in 1961. So the 5 Yosemite high camps, including the one Sequoia National Park high camp that was established in 1938, I believe. They were all constructed in that. That's exactly what I was talking about there. Thanks, technology. They were all established prior to the Wilderness Act. And so a lot of people argue for the high camps because they've been grandfathered into designated wilderness. And so they're appropriate because they've now, after almost 100 years been infused into our collective. Like, this is how we experience wilderness. Let me describe the high camps first of all, for those of you who are not familiar. They are cabins like so. Some permanent structures, some semi-permanent tent cabins that are connected by a series of trails. Now, they also provide meals, they provide beds, they provide drinking water for their visitors, and they're reserved for those people in the reservations. Each high camp in Yosemite can, I think, sleep up to 40 to 60, depending on the high camp. And so when you do the math, at any given time, there might be 300 people. If they're full all summer, there might be 300 people making the circuit. And you ask, how do they get all the food and other bits and pieces of detritus and infrastructure in there? And that's through passtock use. So you have animals in the back country, long lines of horses or mules. How do they purify the drinking water? Well, there's a whole purification system. Under California law, that purification system is only growing more robust and more kind of intrusive into the backcountry. So there's a lot of infrastructure around these high camps. And you can argue too that what the Wilderness Act mandates is that there aren't any permanent human structures in the backcountry. Like I mentioned, the counter argument about it is what they may or may not be grandfathered in. And that's what's on the table right now. Here's the Bear Claw Meadows and Sequoia Kings Canyon high camp. Sorry, that sort of cropped. And so what's on the table right now, and this is what's to me very exciting about my thesis, and it's not by design at all, is we are now in the 50th anniversary year of the writing of the Wilderness Act, and we're also on the verge, as we speak, of the national parks creating a 20 or 30 year wilderness stewardship plan. And what that means is Sequoia is actually ahead of the game. Yosemite is lagging. Arguably, they have a lot more going on in Yosemite than Sequoia Kings. But what's on the table is this dismantling, like I mentioned, dismantling these high camps and getting rid of all the related infrastructure. Also, increasing the amount of trails, getting rid of pack stock or horsepacking trips that have been pretty traditional in Yosemite and Sequoia. And so that would be one extreme, dismantling this infrastructure. The other side of it, for those who advocate for that contact, for that access into the backcountry, myself included, and this comes down to my ultimate thesis, is by dismantling these high camps, you're setting that precedent that humans don't belong in the backcountry, in wilderness areas. Whereas we know from prehistory, the precedent is that people have been a pretty important part in these environments. And certainly people can alter and have the ability and inclination to alter wilderness areas and beat them down to where they don't resemble wilderness at all. But there's degrees within those ends of the spectrum. So, according to a parks official, this was absolutely off the record, but I'm going to tell you all today, I won't mention his name, that's what he expects to come out of all this is that the high camps, the infrastructure and the people that they draw will not be increased, but they will not be dismantled either. And this is going to be years and years probably process and lawsuits by wilderness advocate groups like Wilderness Watch and Sierra Club. And good for them. This creates some really interesting dialogue. I think that besides just this particular issue and informing kind of the new wilderness stewardship plan, it's also a really interesting time to put our cultural wilderness ethics and definitions under the microscope. Because I feel like contact is important. And I feel like access is important. And we have that. And I think regulations are important in areas in the national parks. And I think the national parks serve a really interesting function. I don't want to go so far as to say that they follow somewhat of a pure park, city parks, amusement park type model. But as far as education, as far as access for the masses, they do a really great job with that. And I think that for the purists, there's plenty of wilderness that, might have a road there. Maybe it's not designated as such, but it's still pretty darn wild. For those of you who spend some time in BLM land, out and about, where you can pretty much do what you want. That, to me, speaks more to wilderness and kind of goes back to our frontier roots. Question. Yeah.
Like, in terms of looking at our country as a whole, like you're talking specifically about here and that, like how many of these permanent structures, like, or semi-permanent, whatever they are, how many of these hut-type things, and there's from Colorado, coming from Vermont, like what are we talking about in terms of numbers?
It's a good question. I don't know. I can't speak to the numbers in the country as a whole.
Okay.
But I know that, and this kind of ties back to my intro, why Sierra Nevada is so important, because it has influenced practices and policies throughout the country, just by virtue of its place in history. And I think that this is important because it will inform what happens to structures, prehistoric and historic structures in wilderness throughout the United States. I think that's definitely something to look out for. That's putting down the table everywhere. So I can't speak to the numbers as a whole. But as you know, all over the United States, there's national parks that are accessed by millions of people. And it's a beautiful thing. Because without that, the proper management and regulation, a lot of people can enjoy places without detracting from their inherent wild qualities. I wanted to throw this in there. Those of you who were around for my discussion talk last weekend, this was during the government shutdown a year ago, where trails, the park borders were closed, like the entrances and exits were closed, but the trails were. And to me, it was just a symbolic, it's very real state of here's how we are marketing our wilderness, how the national parks are marketing their wilderness areas. Well, we can't be here because we don't have funding. Therefore, the rides are closed. And that to me was very interesting. And I don't want to take anything away from the Park Service for that. But I think that, again, national parks fulfill a function brilliantly. And fortunately and unfortunately, when Washington are deliberating over whatever it is they're deliberating over, then our wilderness gets shut down. And I too feel the need to say, hey, doesn't the wilderness transcend our human dramas? Like, sure, it does. So, in conclusion, like I've stated, I believe that the national parks serve a function to educate us what wilderness is, the place wilderness can have in our lives, in our culture. And I urge people to take a close look at our place in wild places. And I think what it comes down to is that it's just to recognize that there's not just wilderness in designated wilderness. There's wilderness in the coyote that roams the street and eats cats. There's wildness in the deer I see when I wake up early in the morning in that urban Salt Lake City. And there's wildness everywhere we look, and I think that by marketing designated wilderness as the only existing pure wilderness, we're giving every other place without that designation. We're not giving it fair credit as a place to be rejuvenated, as a place to experience the sublime. And that's it in a nutshell. Yes.
So how do you feel about designation of new wilderness? Is there some millions of acres still anything to designate you a wilderness?
I'm glad you asked. Yeah, there's tons of points, and as you all can tell, I'm blazing over lots of complex stuff going on. But I think that the designation of wilderness is important. Otherwise, those places might fall under, might be in danger of being developed or degraded. So absolutely, by no means saying that this wilderness doesn't have a place, and nor should there. I think that most places should be designated wilderness. It's mostly, I think, marketing as having those characteristics. There's lots of those characteristics everywhere as well. Yeah.
So, like wilderness areas, you can plant packworks. You can't beat them out.
That's right.
Bring a handsaw, but you can't bring a chainsaw.
That's right.
In order to get a helicopter to do an evac, you have to go to Congress. But you're insane. So there's a big disconnect.
Yeah.
As someone who spends a lot of time in the wilderness parks, national forests, BLM, I see wilderness and national parks being this pristine, you can't touch and didn't go in.
Right.
You know, I saw the evolution happen when the legal trace principle was established between goals and national forests. The goals was using service areas and the national forest service. I wanted to turn people into let's take all your food into this area rather than let's forage and extract.
Yeah.
So the mindset has changed.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we're doing this because it needs to be examined.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mention that. There's two things going on there. Is automated machinery or whatever in wilderness areas. And pack stock certainly it's odd because in some wilderness areas pack stock is given the nod, and others it's not allowed at all. It degrades water sources, and trail systems, and all the rest of it. And then as far as that rescue, in my experience, if there's someone in trouble, and actually that was the rationale behind the government shutdown, closing trail systems in the 70s. And what's interesting to me about that is there's a little bit of a conflict there because when the park is open and well funded, they say you better be self-sufficient, you better know your LMT, you better know basic rescue systems. But when there's no rescue personnel to be funded, you can't go in there because you're not in trouble. You rely on us. So there's a bit of a conflict there.
That rescue issue has been brought up by the anti-wilderness people. It's completely wrong.
Right, yeah.
I've flown air ambulances. It's actually left up to the counties.
Yeah, absolutely.
In most places, that's actually a myth. And fairly misrepresented.
And the National Park Service have
absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
One thing I like about Costa Rica is you walk up to the volcano, look down the crater, and there's no sign saying don't jump.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this country doesn't do anything modestly.
Right.
So you have a structure in the backcountry, and you have teams of pack mules bringing out the gourmet meals, or whatever they're feeding. You've got outhouses, and you've got all this stuff. There's just no modesty. There's no kind of soft-spokenness about us. And that leads to this pendulum extremes of we're going to trash the place with the gold rush and Glen Canyon Dam and Hetch Hetchy, and the list goes on and on. We're going to just destroy the place, and threats with the Colorado River in the past, or we're going to protect it 100%, and that whole immodesty, that whole extreme culture that we have is what leads to the Wilderness Act, and then the debate about the pack camps. And so there are lots of root causes going on here. But so, what is your hope for the prospect of a more modest dialogue? A dialogue where, okay, you folks can go in there, but you're going to pack in your own food, or there won't be any toilets there. You're going to have to figure that one out for yourselves.
Yeah.
Because we talk modestly, like don't expect help, but when help comes, it comes like the military.
Right. I think in terms of the high camps, I think they have a pretty important place to provide access and at least contain some of the impact that would be happening in a larger area if it weren't for those high camps. And I think that it just comes back to access, really, is the argument for them, not just by me but others, is that they provide access for everybody. It doesn't not just limited to the young, intrepid, adventurous, in shape, who have those quintessential wilderness skills, and they do contain that impact. And I think that's important, especially if we're looking at creating access for so many people. So many people are interested in yes, some contain it, and they do come. The high camps come with their own set of issues and impacts: trail, water. People talk about recite the visual impacts of having hut systems for the wilderness experience. People are pretty. It's pretty easy to gauge where people are going to be. If you want to avoid people, it's pretty easy to avoid them. Is my sense of it. That's not necessarily like academic. That's just my knee jerk. Good question, Pat.
Taking off kind of what Dustin said in terms of why you created this, because I'm a person who is on the board of directors of the Arizona Wilderness Coalition.
Yeah.
However, I'm also finding that wilderness is constrained in many situations. You know, I know but also we recently signed an agreement paper with the Access Funds, which is a group of climbers that they've been banned from certain wilderness areas because of the impact of climbers, and yet climbers, you know, really embrace wilderness. That are going to be great wilderness tours. I really want to exclude that. And then mountain bikers, like you said, mountain bikers. That's excluded from wilderness.
Yeah.
And yet there's also, you know, some very ethical mountain bikers. And so because of that, we're creating this a more polar situation where these people, when we really all want mostly the same thing, instead we're at odds with the people that we should be partnering with and working with. And so one thing that I'm seeing discussion on more, and that is places that are preserved under some different heading, whether it's monument or something, and not specific wilderness.
Right.
And as well, even working more with game and fish right now, there are certain things because of the minimum tool, like you were saying, you know, you gotta have a handsaw, which is that are constraining in wildlife management, crucial wildlife management. And so, I mean, yeah, I embrace the wilderness activity, but I'm also seeing these constraints. So I really love seeing this dialogue.
Yeah, and, you know, there's no real answers because there's so many avenues you could go down that would be slippery slopes. You know, where do you stop one activity and start the next? There's a lot of ways you can go, and a lot of arguments that can be made. And I think that's why I say that the Wilderness Act is brilliant, just in terms of starting that dialogue on a national and a political scale. And I think it does a really good job. I think I started this study as I really wanted to poke holes in the Wilderness Act. The more I looked at it, the more I looked at the policies. It wasn't the Wilderness Act itself. Maybe the language borrows from this like pristine idea that, you know, it's sort of abrasive, but I think it allows for provisions.
Yeah, I think the language question, like I have two related thoughts, and I think like I would encourage you just like publish, like if you want, like because I know like in my line work, I'd really appreciate more things to reference about that language specifically, like because I mean I work on the East Coast, so like I'm working with Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, which like their management is crazy, and like if you want to talk about the refuge and like what does that mean,
Right.
And it's managed by like the National Park Service, like, which is so different on the East Coast than it is out west. So I think this is super interesting and like great job. Please publish so I can cite you. And my other question, like you mentioned it in the beginning, I was just wondering if you could give like a minute's worth of discussion just on that consumptive versus non-consumptive recreational use question. We should talk about this later because I'm drawing on that a lot in my proposed thesis work. But I just was wondering, like, if you could just put out a little bit more thought on that specific issue and like how to even work within that. How do you even talk about it?
Yeah, and that's a really good question because what does that look like? How do I go and hike or mountain bike or climb consumptively? Then how do I do it? What does that look like? What do the two look like, and how is that different? Really, and I think that, you know, there's Again, there's no permitting processes that allow certain activities to happen, and those limit those activities. And so you can argue that, well, if you're not just opening the floodgates, then you're allowing for a more thoughtful process that can be seen as to be more aesthetic type of recreation. But I think where I sort of draw the line is the historic kind of recreation that is then as degrading almost to the environment as, you know, again, as I'm going far saying this, as a body and whatnot. But, you know, in the 70s when Lunar Trails came about, it was because these places were being wiped to death. Trails were degraded, campsites were degraded, human feces was everywhere, trash was everywhere. So people were out there, they're experiencing it, and have these transformative moments that they were doing to greater numbers. And how to behave. So Lunar Trace came about around that time. So maybe Lunar Trace is kind of a good, you know, marker of like where that consumptive use started to shift.
Mount Everest is certainly a good example of that. A good case study of loving something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's tons of literature to answer your question that I should actually just put out my reference list in my thesis paper. Because in terms of the purity and the Language and Buildings Act, all these things, there's volumes of reading. It's really interesting.
Thanks, man. Last question here, and then we'll
Just, you kind of looked at it over the beginning, and you mentioned the slippery slope. Your arguments have been taken by the to extreme sense. You can make a case from the argument as to why you there's a huge disparity in conservation and environmental organizations where they're not taking the argument that you really should be focusing on really well and forget about it. And at the forefront of that is William Cronin. The trouble with wilderness. And I already heard people skip to the end. He says we need both. I mean, he's cited by the wilderness opponents as why bottom the wilderness, but you need both. And as people are reacting to your presentation, oh, this is great, it's a fine balance. And it's well thought out on the organizational and individual level. You need both, and don't jump one or the other.
Yeah, I think that's sort of where I was headed, where I am headed is through this process, you know, of course there's this pure wilderness ethic. There's nothing lacking in the bone in the backcountry as far as transforming the bones. But yeah, what do you do with that in life?
In the last 50 years, the reason for wilderness is, I think, is shifted more towards a symbolic.
Right.
Why do we have it? Because we can't.
Right.
And it's also symbolic act of humility.
Right.
And you need that as a symbolic act of restraint.
Exactly.
And you also need to work aggressively in the areas in which we do live.
Yeah, I really like that philosophy of these represent our restraint as a society, what we're willing to not touch in the native development. And Richard White is author who wrote a really great paper on hybrid wilderness. And this was amazing when you started looking at your backyard, like the inherent wildness around us, like I was saying. And I think that's absolutely true. Focusing on the places in our surroundings, that connects us with that wilderness.
I was at a conference in Aspen a couple of years where E.O. Wilson was there, and E.O. Wilson, the wilderness is a square foot, and the cornucopians in the audience were, oh, we don't need wilderness. They got E.O. Wilson, say, oh, that's what we don't. Yeah. You got your square foot outside.
Right.
Like,
people choose any line of argument for or against.
Thank you, Jason.